And so you have this experience with Target and with United Healthcare. Um, so I think that that's a great place to start. Like,
Hmm.
how how do you walk into an environment where people are like those folks at Web3? They I don't know. When you when you get over the shock that this is something that they don't know,
Hmm.
what's next? I mean, how do you diplomatically introduce them to this and pull them along? How do you personally do it? What strategy have you developed?
Well, I think the important thing is to remember the fact that they are unaware, or that they might be aware, but that it still might be very new. And um, just like whenever you have something that is new to someone, or they may not be aware of it, you have to kind of meet them where they are and talk
Mm.
about it in terms that that they'll be able to understand right now. And so if you whip out your handy dandy guide of the web content accessibility guidelines, it's just going to put them off further, because it's technical and it's confusing, and it doesn't really explain why accessibility matters or what it's for. But if you are able to, through conversation, understand what they do know, what they think they know, and what they don't know, because those really are three different things. Often people think that they know it and don't necessarily. But understanding that, then it's easy to have a conversation around, um, what is accessibility? What does it look like? What does it do? What does it do for you? What does it do for them? Right? And if they can see it as something that's a mutually beneficial proposition, um, they're more likely to want to learn more and understand more. Understanding that's like, oh, it's not just about helping, people with disabilities. We might benefit from this too, because we might be able to sell a thing, or we might be able to innovate, or, there might be some benefit to us as a company in addition to being able to assist people with disabilities.
That was one of the things that interested me a lot about your messaging when you were talking to them, because I guess because in some ways I'm also involved in accessibility, or at least advocacy for. I think I'll speak for myself. I kind of lose sight of where someone might be who isn't working with that on a regular basis, where it's not something that's talked about every day. And let me give you an example. When I was designing websites, and keep in mind this was kind of late 90s, Flash was really big. And I had a client that saw a Flash site with these buttons and all of the stuff moving around, and she absolutely wanted Flash on her website. And I said to her, well, here's the thing. Sure, you can put that on it, but it makes your website inaccessible to many people who might be using screen readers where the Flash doesn't work. And she very quickly said, "Oh, well, that doesn't really matter to me, because I don't think a whole lot of my clients are going to be blind, and I really like the way it looks, and you know, and this is um, trying to figure out a way to phrase this, but I think it comes up, and I could be wrong. I think that there are a lot of people out there, when you talk about inclusion for people who are blind, in a wheelchair, or you name the disability, okay? I think that that brings something negative to their perspective. and they think, I'm not sure that I want to appeal to that clientele. Okay? And I think that that's just an ignorance that we find and have to deal with. And what I liked about your messaging was you were able to talk about, okay, so if you do this for this group of people, it may start out that way. Maybe it's for somebody, with a screen reader, but guess what? Now the person who's driving in the car and maybe can't reach their phone, they can get it. Or their kids are, they're trying to do something with their kids and they're multitasking. So all of a sudden, this is not something for that, air quote, alien person with a disability that you may or may not want as a client, right? Now it's something that, we can all use this. We can all use these ramps on the sidewalk when we're pushing a stroller or on a skateboard.
Mm-hmm.
And and I hope you pick up on this, because I don't mean to be belaboring this point myself. I want to hear what you have to say about it. But I think that the beautiful thing about that is putting it. I think for the most part, unless you have a friend or you have a family member with a disability, you don't know. You just don't know. And I also think you probably may have a negative impression because of your lack of knowledge. And that, I'm trying to say that in a way where I'm not being judgmental to the person. It's just that they don't know. They don't have an experience. And so you have to get outside of that context, and you have to put it into something that they understand, like, now your kids can ride their skateboards up and down this ramp on the sidewalk. Or, and like you said, now you'd be able to use your phone with a voice command, and you couldn't do it before. So, Steve, did you show up at Target with that, or did you have to learn that the hard way, or how did you come to that? You just said it so naturally in that interview.
Well, I think it's you do learn it, and I think I would love to say I showed up with that, but I think I learned it because what I found was people shut down. People didn't want to listen to me. And, eventually you got to ask yourself why. Is it me? Like, why do people not want to listen? I'm a pretty nice guy, and why are people not wanting to listen to this? And then I thought, well, maybe I'm just too close to the problem, I'm the problem. And so I'm seeing it a lot more close up because I see the impact of it, and the people I'm talking to don't. And so I went through those things, and I thought, gosh, I can't do anything about the second one. I can try to be objective, and certainly I try, but what can I do? And then I thought, maybe, what if it's not one of those three things? What if it's not that that I'm too close, that I'm really the problem, or that, they just don't like me or my message, personally. What if there's another reason why people are shutting down? And I started to think, what could that possibly be? And I thought, I wonder if people are understanding what it is I'm talking about in the first place, and what the impact of that is. And I didn't know if that was, if I was on the right track or whatever, but it seemed like a better track to be on than, people just don't like me or don't care track. So I thought, well, let me see where this goes. And so I started asking, what do you think of when we're talking about accessibility? Like, what comes to mind? And I started getting feedback like, well, it's about, avoiding a lawsuit. Well, it's about, helping people with disabilities, but we really don't know how many people those are. So, it's a small group, we don't even know if we have any. And I thought, wow, it's feedback that helped me to see that, maybe they aren't aware of what I'm talking about or the importance of it. I mean, they're not entirely wrong, right? But that isn't the full picture. Maybe if I can fill in the rest of that picture for them, it'll be a more attractive picture versus a very narrow, we're just trying to avoid a lawsuit. Sure, that's a good reason to do it, but it's not the only reason to do it. And so if I can shift the thinking from there and recognize that that's where they are, good, bad, or indifferent, it's a place to start that conversation instead of me just sort of speaking at them and not with them.
So you clearly made a conscious effort based on getting, kind of bounced around a little bit at first on and trying to develop some salesmanship. In terms of, okay, so what's in this for you, as opposed to, avoiding a lawsuit. Yeah, that's great, but it's a negative. You know what I mean? That's a negative, and who gets real motivated by that negative? They're going to get more motivated by something positive, like, okay, you're going to sell more of your widgets.
Well, I had a lot of time for self-reflection, I think. And I really wanted this to be successful.
Yeah.
At the time, I mean, I still obviously do, but like at the time I was, this was a new thing, and I really, really wanted it to work. And so I spent a lot of time being sort of introspective and trying to think of, what am I doing wrong? And then I realized maybe it's not me doing something wrong. Maybe it's just that I'm doing something right, but at the wrong time or to the wrong people. Mm-hmm. And it made me feel less sad.
Right. Sure.
It's easy to go down that path and be like, I'm just a terrible communicator. People don't like me. And I thought, well, that could be true, but rather than go down that deep, dark path, let's think about this a different way. Maybe I'm talking to the wrong people, or maybe I'm saying things in a way they don't understand. And so I started looking at that, and it's that awareness piece of like, it was like a light turned on, and I was like, oh my gosh, just because I'm passionate about this and doesn't mean everyone else is, and other people are, have priorities that may not have anything to do with accessibility, and then there are people who just don't understand or have a very skewed understanding of what that is. And maybe if we start there, it'll be easier. And I've always found that if people understand what it is that accessibility means, and that does mean different things to different people or different roles. If they can understand it, which might mean seeing it in action, it might mean reading about it, it might mean, different things. But once they get it, then it's much easier for them to make that leap. Becomes more of a jump, becomes more of a step to, hey, I get this, I can do something about this, and I want to do something about this. It's much easier to get there once they have that understanding.
Did you have like a specific sort of an aha moment where you were kind of fishing around trying to figure out, okay, so how am I going to get these people engaged in this? And all of a sudden you started noticing, oh, somehow or another I've gotten them a little bit more engaged. Let me work a little bit more on this angle. Did you ever have that moment? And what was the angle that seemed to be effective?
For you mean for people really understanding?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about that corporate, and I guess I'm just imagining in my head, this may never have happened, but I'm imagining that corporate curmudgeon who, okay, so we're trying to avoid a lawsuit here. That's why you're here, Steve. And this accessibility thing is a real pain in the ass for me because it could mean that I've got a very expensive lawsuit on my hand. And, what are we talking here? 5%, 7%, 2%? And I'm not even sure I want these blind folks, as customers because they're trying to sue me. So, you've got that serious curmudgeon. And, did you ever find yourself in a place where you were dealing with that kind of an individual and that sort of an outlook and actually were able to, to turn that person around a little bit to say, hey, this is a lot more than 5%. And this is something that could be used in other ways for some of your customers without blindness or without, deafness, or you name the disability. Did you ever find, like, I don't know, have a moment where, somebody like that you were able to turn them around or at least get them to look at it in a different way?
Yeah, it's the first thing is to really understand that a person may be honest about where they're coming from and come off in a way that's not very positive. So, I would occasionally talk to people that were like, well, I'm interested in accessibility if you can show me how that equates to more revenue.
Okay.
And I thought, wow, that person is a real jerk. They don't care about people with disabilities because they only care about revenue.
Right.
Well, the thing is, for some executives, their success is tied to revenue goals. If they don't hit certain revenue goals for their division or department or whatever it is, they're gone, and so that has to be their main focus, because if it doesn't equate to revenue, it doesn't equate to success on a performance standard for them. And once I realized that, because, I've never been in a position where, the revenue of a company really impacted me very directly, like, we didn't make this much money, so you're gone kind of situation. Mm-hmm. But that's where a lot of, executive vice presidents and senior vice presidents are. If they don't get an ROI of a certain percentage or margin or whatever it is, they can be replaced with someone who can. Mm-hmm. And so once I understood that, I started to realize, wow, maybe these people aren't being jerks. Maybe they're being honest and coming from a place that reflects what for them has to be their priority. I guess another example would be if someone is like, well, gosh, we have to do this to avoid a lawsuit. Well, if that person is a lawyer, right, they might have a tendency to think that way because that's probably the world they're in. Mm-hmm. And especially in a corporate environment, that might be their whole job is trying to protect the company from taking any sort of action or making decisions that, would increase risk of a lawsuit. So again, doesn't necessarily mean they're anti-people with disabilities or anti-accessibility at all. It might just be an honest reflection of what they do, where they are, and what they know. And once I understood that and remembered to always breathe deeply a few times before jumping to any judgments, what I found is, for the most part, people aren't jerks. People aren't against accessibility, but people do have to wrestle with other real priorities, whether that's budget, whether that's revenue, whether that's time, whether that's, someone else's thing that, business needs something or other delivered in a whatever. There are other priorities sometimes that people have to deal with, and they need to understand how accessibility can support those priorities and not be a conflict with those priorities or not cause friction with them reaching those priorities. And understanding that then makes it easier to have the conversation. If your concern is, gosh, I'm worried about risk, legal risk, let's talk about it from that perspective, right? But if your concern is, gosh, I'm worried about this is going to cause a huge delay and I need to deliver this new thing that we're building in 3 months. I'm on a really tight timeline. Well, maybe we approach that conversation not from the perspective of risk, because, you don't care about that as much as you don't want it to slow down and cause friction for your timeline. So maybe we have that conversation around, hey, let's talk about how we can do accessibility in a way that doesn't put your timeline in jeopardy. Let's figure out how we can do this as part of what you're doing versus some extra thing that you have to panic about, at the end of the process. And if they come away with, oh, we do this and I can still hit my 3-month deadline that I'm under, well, heck yeah, I'm all about it then, as long as that issue is resolved, at least, initially, and they don't view it as a threat to that, all of a sudden the walls just come down. But you have to be able to step back and be vulnerable, I guess, and accept that people are going to not be all jazzed up about this, but possibly for reasons that may not be so obvious. And what may seem like the obvious, reason of we just don't want to do it, may not come into play at all.
So one of the interesting things I think I hear you saying is, yes, okay, so step one is awareness, and awareness of what accessibility is about. But part of that awareness is being aware of what the decision makers' priorities are, what makes their world, and not be, necessarily looking at them as opposed to accessibility, but recognizing that it is one of many, many priorities that they have, and how can, you help frame this in a way that makes it something that's going to fit in with their other priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very interesting, to me, that's a very interesting part of awareness. I think because it's so easy to think, just being aware of the accessibility and say the needs of people who are using your product. No, there's an awareness that you as the accessibility advocate need to show up with, and that's like this active listening component of, well, what's important to you, and how can we make accessibility part of what's important to you, or at least show you how it's going to help you get what it is you want.
Yeah, and with decision makers, it's very important, but also even peers or colleagues or whatever it might be. It could be that a decision maker says, oh yes, we are going to do accessibility. That's our thing. We're going to do it. And you're working with a developer or a designer who says, gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. This is all new to me. Or, they may have the same concerns, but on a much smaller level. Designers sometimes says, gosh, I've got to deliver this design by next week. It's already Wednesday. I don't have time to have accessibility look at this design. I got to get it done. Or a developer says, geez, I would love to make this accessible, but I don't understand ARIA yet because I've never learned it, and, having that conversation and understanding, okay, this person isn't saying no, but they're already working at full capacity and they don't have time to read a book about ARIA. Mm-hmm. How do we help them to understand, or coach them in a way that, doesn't require them to say, oh my God, where am I going to find time to learn all this stuff? And still recognize that, they have a real concern. And the only way this is going to work for them is if we are able to help them overcome that concern and show that accessibility can be supportive and not obstructive. And so I just try to apply that with anyone. I learned it with decision makers because they're quick to say no, but mm-hmm. I found that it really is applicable to project managers, to developers, to designers, to just about anyone that I've ever worked with that, isn't me, that may be coming from a different perspective than where I'm coming from. And also sometimes helping to, I I guess also understanding their perspective can help to shape up my own perspective. Maybe I'm not seeing something, maybe there's some bigger piece of, I one time had this big argument. We went back and forth with this one decision maker about this accessibility. Yes, we should do this. Yes, we have to do this, blah, blah, blah. No, we don't. I don't want to. It's going to be too expensive. It's ridiculous. Back and forth, back and forth. There is legal risk. They countered with, well, it's too much resources, for this timeline, blah, 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 back and forth. And then finally, they said, well, I don't know why we have to do it. We're getting rid of this functionality in 2 months. Well, if I'd known that up front, we wouldn't have having this discussion. I would have been like, fine, let's get rid of it and make sure whatever we replace this with is going to be accessible. They had switched to a different thing. And I was like, we had all this conflict for this thing that, knowing that, I'm thinking, well, God, is she thinking I want them to make this whole thing accessible in 2 months and spend a ton of money on something they're discontinuing? And which was, absolutely unbelievable. And I said, well, I told the person, I said, if I'd known that, we wouldn't have had this discussion. And she goes, well, I thought you did know that, and you were still pushing for this to get done within the 2 month timeline before we got rid of this thing. And I'm like, so from, obviously I don't, not in her head, but from her perspective, if I were her, I would think, God, that accessibility guy's a, really pushy jerk, we're getting rid of this thing. Why does that Steve guy want us to spend all this money on this technology or this thing we're getting rid of in 2 months? And, that's just dumb. Again, assuming that I knew what the plan was, which I didn't. And she was very apologetic. Oh, I thought you knew or had seen this roadmap that we have. And I said, no, I'm not on that meeting, so I did not know that we were getting rid of this thing in 3 months. We walked away very happy. I realized, gosh, she's not anti-accessibility. She just doesn't want to waste money. And she walked away with, gosh, I need to make sure we include accessibility earlier on and make sure that they do get these roadmaps so that they, can be more tactical in what they're doing versus trying to solve problems that may not be problems. So it wound up being a win-win for both. But just understanding, the other perspective shaped my own perspective.
Bullet point 3 on awareness is that communication piece, I think, in terms of, making sure that we're talking the same language, or that, we both are looking at the same project or facts or dimensions or whatever. And I'm going to guess that often is not the case. You walk in as a strong advocate for this, and the other person walks in for the strong advocate of ROI, and and you kind of miss each other a little bit because of the communication. No one's at fault, but it's just like your priorities are different. So you kind of reminded me of like the second thing that I think you've probably bumped up to against a million times, and I've heard this and it infuriates me, and that's just my initial reaction. Oh, it's going to cost too much. And it's going to cost too much, I think, because, all right, nobody thought about it from the beginning, so you designed it less inclusively because nobody knew about it, and now to add it on, it's going to be a bolt-on, and yeah, it's going to take a lot of time and cost some money. It should have been done at the outset, but it wasn't. What do you do? How do you have that conversation where, and maybe this is what you encountered at Target, I'm not sure, but when you walk into the project midway through, at the end, after it's been all done or whatever, and you realize, yeah, it's going to be a really expensive fix, but it didn't have to be. Accessibility doesn't have to be expensive, but it is when we're this far along and it hasn't been considered. Where do you go? What is your next step?
Well, I think, you have to be very careful because it's very easy depending on what prior conversations that may have been had, to really want to be like, told you, like, told you so, like, see, I told you this is going to cost you a ton of money. I was right.
That's what's running through your head.
Absolutely, right? Like,
how do you get it to not come out of your mouth?
It is tough. It is a real tough thing because, you want to be like, this is I've been preaching this thing for 6 months and you didn't want to listen, and now it's going to cost you a lot of money, or you can't release on time, and I told you this was going to happen, and now I don't care anymore. But the thing is, that does no good. It's just going to make the person an enemy, and no matter what happens, you are where you are, right? I think that's the first thing, is to a lot of deep breathing, but just accept, like, we are where we are, and this needs to be a learning type of opportunity where we can say something like, well, let's figure out how to make a plan to move forward from here. Let's figure out a timeline and some concrete actionable steps that can be taken to move us from where we are, and in parentheses, where we should never have been, to, like, where we want to be if you had listened to me. Because if you are able to not say the things you want to say, suddenly you become an ally, because the person's like, okay, they're going to help me get there. Mm-hmm. And you could point out that this wouldn't have been a problem, but they're going to know that, right? Like, people genuinely, when they mess up and they realize they've messed up, they already know what they did or didn't do. If you beat them over the head with it, it's just going to make them more defensive. So what I have found is, if you can help them to get where they need to be, then you're being supportive and helpful, versus, again, being sort of this person who's punishing them for a mistake they probably themselves wish they had never made in the first place. The other part is to try to enlist them as an ally. When all is said and done, geez, that was really tough these last few months as we had to get on course. Can you help to, whenever you talk with your peers, let's raise awareness around this. You can let them know your experience of this, because, I can talk about it till, next Sunday, but you're the one who just went through this, and your peers are going to listen to you before they listen to me. So, when you're talking with your peers, maybe raise the situation. Otherwise, it's going to happen again and again and again with different people. And people have been very willing to do that because they can phrase it up in a very positive way. I had one person who was, totally didn't listen to what I said and did their own thing, and everything went off track, just like I said, and it cost a lot of money, and he turned it into an opportunity. He called it a learning opportunity, and had this whole PowerPoint deck on lessons learned, and held like accessibility discovery sessions as if he had done this major thing, and he was now presenting it as, here's how you could save money. Mm-hmm. To other people. And I thought, wow, you're the only person who lost money and is posing it to other people as, I did this so you don't have to. And but if it works, if people listen to that, that's fine, because my thinking was they were probably more apt to listen to him, than me. And he pulled it off. He had like regular sessions with teams, these discovery sessions, and let's look at what you're doing and make sure that you don't whatever. And it was like, wow, this guy became this like I mean, people were saying, people were coming to me that had listened to him and said, oh, we're hearing about ways we can avoid, spending a lot of extra money and going over our project budgets. Would love to talk to you more about that. And I'm like, all right, we can have the conversation as a budget sort of, we don't want to go over budget conversation. If that's better, then let's do accessibility earlier. We can call it a different thing. That's fine.
What a long view. That's, well, I can see where, the knee-jerk reaction to something like that might be different. But I think I don't know. It's kind of ingenious that you were able to sit back and recognize, this person who was not originally an ally, like it or not, is now selling my message in a different way, and it doesn't matter how it gets sold or who's selling it or whether my message got trampled in the process. We're getting to the same place. There are a lot of people, I think, that would have a difficult time with that. So that's a long view. It sounds like you're able to take, which it's going to get it accomplished, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, people you have to be willing to be very flexible, and, honestly, you can't, and this, it's very tough. It was challenging for me, but you can't let ego get in the way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You can say things like, like I said earlier, well, I was right. You were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I knew this was going to happen, but it's not going to get you anywhere. And
mm-hmm.
you can do all these things, but if you let other people have the win, sometimes you get a lot more traction. When the guy turned what I viewed as a very negative situation into a positive one for himself, I was angry because I'm like, why doesn't he just tell people to talk to me or whatever, right? He's now trying to take credit for something that,
I would be angry too. Yeah.
I was really frustrated. And then I thought, what? But people are coming to me now that weren't before. Is it really a bad thing? I mean, I'm accomplishing my goal. People are talking to me, and they weren't as much before. So am I winning here or am I not? And I thought, well, my ego wants them to talk to me. I should be the one getting this credit. I'm the one who did the work. I'm the one who saw the problem. I'm the one who did.
Sure.
Well, yeah, but what good is any of that? The important thing is other people are now proactively coming to me versus me having more told you so moments.
Yeah.
So it's hard to not be angry at that. It really is. But if you can get past that, it's beneficial, and it winds up being a more successful approach. It's this, I was talking to someone else who had an idea, and someone had just sort of taken their idea and used it as their own. And I said, that is super frustrating and whatever. And I said, but sometimes if you give someone an idea and they run with it, and then you can say, hey, what a great idea you had, they're going to feel awesome, and you're getting what you wanted. It's just you have to sometimes be okay with it being your idea. And I said, are you going to make money from this idea? Is this idea going to get you a promotion? Or are you just hung up on the fact that it really was your idea? Someone else is taking credit for it. They're going to look good and you're not. But how does this, other than, ego, how does this impact you? It's not like they got a patent on your idea, or they are getting a raise on your idea. You had an idea, they ran with it. It's, something they shouldn't have done. But ultimately, you're getting what you wanted. And so, other than a little bit of a bruised ego, is there really any drawback to this? And often if you think about it, there generally isn't, unless it's tied to some, if someone took the idea and got a promotion out of it or whatever, that's, there obviously are exceptions. But, for the most part, if you suggest something and sometimes you suggest it 4 or 5 times and then someone else is like, hey, let's do this thing. And it's like, yeah, the thing I've been suggesting 5 times, it's like, you could dig your heels in, but just go along. Hey, what a great idea that is, and then they're going to love you because they're going to be like, oh my God, this person supports me.
It's a total ego thing. You're right. Totally. But I think it's, it's a real human nature thing to dig your heels in at that point and go, hey, wow, it was my idea.
It took me a very long time to learn that. I'd love to say I learned that from day one, and I didn't. And what I found, again, it was introspection of, why is this not working for me? And a lot of it was because I was frustrating people. I would, dig my heels in. Mm-hmm. I would want to be right. I would, and more important, I'd want them to be wrong. Mm-hmm. And, I felt I had put a lot of work in and I had that right. And, maybe I did on some level, but what it did was it made people view me as confrontational, as contradictory,
sure, yeah.
As, when I was trying to be pragmatic, but viewed as a contrarian, it's because people associated me with, he's just going to, make this difficult. He's going to, it's going to be a pain in the ass. So let's not listen to him, let's just or listen to him and then just forget whatever he says. And I realized, maybe it's because I'm spending so much time trying to be right and not as much time trying to move forward. Maybe I ought to think about why this is. And I kind of realized, geez, it's my own ego getting in the way. And, I wish I had learned it earlier. But it took a long time and it took a lot of people being mad at me to finally realize that, maybe it's not everybody else. Maybe it really is me,
I think that's a particularly difficult self-realization. I can see myself in a lot of what you're describing, and I think it's that sort of recognition or awareness can be particularly challenging, and I guess that goes under the category too of awareness when it comes to having a conversation about this kind of thing. Recognizing that you can be more welcoming to the process of moving forward as opposed to being the one who is right in the situation. So on a little bit more of a technical note, if somebody came to you whether it was a project designer or a new developer, maybe they did have a notion of accessibility, and it sounds like one of your first things might be to school them just a little bit on awareness. What 3 or 4 documents or websites, or what could you? What am I trying to say here? I think for some people, people for the most part are probably not going to just dive right in and embrace accessibility because they have other priorities, right? But what resources might you direct them to say, hey, here are a couple starting points that you could quickly digest. It will give you a better idea of what we're talking about here and what might make your project a little bit more accessible.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So there's a WebAIM, webaim.org. Mm-hmm. I'd like to double check. Let me check real quick to make sure I always forget if they're .org or they're .com. I think they're .org. Heck yeah. Web accessibility in mind. WebAIM is WebAIM.org. They have a ton of resources on their site, and those are free resources, and you can't beat free. Mm-hmm. The other place that I like is Deque University, DEQUE University.com, and they have some free information, a lot of paid information, but it's not super expensive, and it's very detailed information. And what's interesting about DEQU is that they have things in sort of a curriculum type format. So, for example, they have a document accessibility curriculum. They have a, I don't remember the exact names of these, but they have like a developer, curriculum for developers. They have a curriculum for different roles, basically, right? Cool. So that if you are someone who is a decision maker or a little person dealing with risk, you don't really care about ARIA or, how to do accessible JavaScript. Like, none of that stuff matters to you. And if you're a developer who, in fact, is dealing with ARIA and JavaScript and different frameworks and things like that, you might care a little bit about risk, but it's not your thing. It's just going to be extra reading to have to go through. So the way they've kind of divided the courses into different curricula, it makes it a lot easier to figure out, okay, this is my role, this is what I need to know for my role. And that makes it really relevant. So I really love DQUniversity.com. And then the W3C, well, I don't know that I would put that on my top. Well, the W3C does have, so the W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium, and it is a great resource. There's lots of information on the W3C. That's where you can find the WCAG guidelines, the drafts, everything you ever wanted to know. There's examples of different things. There's a lot of stuff. And the problem with that is that there's a lot of stuff, and a lot of it is technical, and a lot of it can be overwhelming. So I would definitely have that on the list, but it probably wouldn't be one of the first places I would go, because I've had developers that have started there come back and be like, okay, I see this huge wall of stuff, and I don't know where I have to start. Mm-hmm. And if I point them to WebAIM first, or DQU, or any of the other accessibility vendors, most of them have blogs and various resources available. It makes it a little bit clearer. For example, WebAIM has a whole thing about forms and form creation. And so if you're building a form, if you start there, it's very easy because you can go through it. You see examples in action. And while all of that stuff is on the W3C sites, you have to kind of jump all over the place to find it, because it depends what you're doing with your form and what we're talking about with the form, and which thing you're using to make your form. And, you can find everything, but it's not easy to find anything. And so, I say it that way, but it's not easy to find things unless you frequently are on that site looking for things because you care about technical standards and that sort of stuff. If you are, then it probably makes a lot of sense. But for the rest of us that are just getting started, it's a tough place to start because it is so complex. There is so much information. Once you kind of understand what you're looking for, though, it's a great place to go, because then you kind of know what you're looking for. It's easy to find stuff when you know what it is you're looking for. It's much harder when you don't really know what you're looking for. Yeah. And you're kind of like, maybe this is it. I don't know. That's when I think the W3C site becomes a resource versus a scary place of information.
I have found that website overwhelming when I've gone. So yeah, and you use that adjective too. So I feel much better And you're right. When I've gone to WebAIM, that one makes a little bit more sense. DQ University sounds like it would be awesome too, because it would be a little bit more tailored to what it is that might be most important for me in whatever capacity I was in. Is there any place else that you would direct someone? Although you did mention like any of the other accessibility vendors may have like some information that could be free or a modest cost that might be helpful.
Yeah, there's so all of the other vendors, so TPGI, Level Access.
Okay.
Those both have blogs and information, and then there are people that tend to be somewhat prominent in the community that blog relatively frequently on various topics that they're either passionate about or that they're studying or working in. There's lots of different blogs. It's oftentimes challenging to go, to find information in a blog form because it's like, gosh, is this real or not? But a lot of the names sort of drift to the top of the list, and you see them over and over again, and you might see them at different workshops. There are a number of workshops and webinars and things like that happen throughout the year, and sometimes you'll see these same names as presenters, and you'll start to know, like, oh, this is a person that always is talking about this subject, and they obviously know their stuff because they've presented it 3 times this year at different workshops. Maybe their blog is credible, and so not the only way to judge a blog, but some of the conferences that exist are also great resources. AxeCon is a open, free conference that DQ hosts, but there's different tracks, and everything's recorded, so you can listen to it later. And there's tracks for designers, for developers, I don't remember them all, but there's different tracks for, it's a regular online workshop type thing. A lot of information there from a lot of different presenters. I love it because often people are talking about what it is that they're doing. There was some great information in the that I got from this year's AxeCon. I'm always learning, and it's always great to kind of know what other people are up to, what's working for them, what's not working for them. Sometimes I get an idea, and sometimes I get confirmation that, okay, maybe I am on the right track, or maybe I'm really on the wrong track because no one else is complaining about this. CSUN is another conference that takes place annually. It's the largest assistive technology conference in the world. A lot of information comes out around CSUN. The conference itself costs money to attend, but a lot of the information is often made available after the conference, or if you look at the agenda for the conference, you can figure out who's presenting or on which topics they're presenting, and oftentimes can find information. So the conferences are also a great wealth of information because people love to present about what they're working on.
So as a newbie, is there a blog or a podcast? And I realize that it's going to be different for developer or whatever the role is, but is there a blog or a podcast that is at the top of your list? Like, oh yeah, this is a good place to get your feet wet and to kind of get a better understanding of what's going on in the accessibility world.
I don't know. There's a lot of good ones, but a lot of them are focused on one thing or another. Yeah. And so finding sort of an overview-ish one is challenging.
Too general a question, and I recognize that. Kind of along the same lines. I have something to do with a website that's been around for a while, And I've learned about this accessibility thing. We're not getting a lawsuit against us, but all of a sudden I realize, oh, maybe we're at risk, or maybe I realize we've never considered this, and I want to take a look at it. I don't have a huge budget. I guess my question to you is, what are some of the big things that you've seen that are relatively fixable at at kind of a basic level? What could I do quickly? And I guess air quotes there. What could I do quickly to make my site more accessible? And again, I realize this is a real general question, but if you were to create like a bullet list of maybe 2 or 3 things that I could just quickly take a look at and try to address, what would those top 2 or 3 things be without like, oh God, you've got to redo your whole website and have a consultant come in and blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, I think there are a few things everyone can do, and one of them that's super easy, at least until you do it, is try to navigate your website just using your keyboard. Don't use your mouse. Just push it off to the side. Use your tab key and your arrow keys to move around. Your tab key should move you from one link or form field to another. And if you have like radio buttons, your arrow keys should move you between them. And if you have checkboxes or buttons, your space bar should activate them. So, very basic keyboard types of things. But what you're trying to do is, can I use my site without using my mouse? Tempting though it may be to pick up my mouse, what is that experience like if I cannot use my mouse? Because you're simulating a bunch of disabilities when doing that, not just screen reader users, but people who have limited motion or who might be using technologies that emulate a keyboard. So they may not even be using a keyboard, but they may be using technologies that emulate keyboard functionality. And going through will help you to understand, wow, I've got this amazing menu that shows up when you hover a mouse over it. But if you can't hover the mouse over this, you can't make this menu show up, or this little tooltip thing that is important. So we really should fix that, because if you can't do it with your keyboard, someone else can't do it with theirs either. And so doing a keyboard test is I think, a great place to start. The other thing you can do is that there are tools that are browser-based tools that are free that you can download. They're extensions or plugins, and you can run them, and they will give you information on or errors that exist on your website. I have a couple of favorites that are free. And there are differences between them, but if you're just getting started, honestly, you could debate which one is best long into the night. What I tell people is just start with whatever one you like, because if you're starting with something, you're doing more than nothing. And so if you try any of these and you think, oh gosh, this doesn't work, or it's too complicated, or it's too overwhelming, or the opposite often happens, where I've tried this and it doesn't give me the information I need, and I don't know how to fix it, and I need to know exactly what the source code of this issue is because I'm a developer and blah, blah, blah. Try one of the others of these tools. But the tools I'd recommend are Axe, which is open source. It's made by Deque, but it's also found in a number of other products. It's a browser plugin. It works with the inspector of a browser, so especially if you're a developer, it's going to live in a place you frequently are anyway. The other tool that I really like is Microsoft makes one called Accessibility Insights. And Accessibility Insights is great because it's free, it's made by Microsoft, it's open source. It has an interface that might be a little more challenging for developers, but might be a little easier for the rest of us. There's ways to highlight stuff if you want to kind of see, like, gosh, what is it talking about? And the other thing that Accessibility Insights does is it has a function where it will guide you through conducting additional manual tests if you want to do that. automation, you can't test all accessibility with automation. You can test maybe 30% or so-ish of accessibility with automation. Mm-hmm. But true accessibility requires a lot of manual testing with screen readers and that sort of stuff. But if you have accessibility insights, it will walk you through how to conduct a lot of that testing for free. And so it's fantastic. There's also a lot of tools within it to do things like, if you want to see your document structure and have an idea of what your headings are or how the keyboard navigation works, you can enable these controls that visually kind of help you to understand that on the page, which is really neat. So I love accessibility insights. And then the other tool that I really like is Wave by WebAIM. Wave has been around for quite a while, and I'm glad that it has been. It's free, and what's nice about it is it overlays the page with different errors or different icons that represent, like, this is a warning, this is an error, this is good, right? So you can see based on these icons, and they're all accessible, by the way, which is kind of neat too. But you can get an idea based on these icons and messaging that kind of shows up as an overlay on the page, what's going on or what's not working well. It, again, is easy to understand, may give you too much may give you not enough information if you're a developer and you'd like to work in the inspector and whatever. Wave may not be your best thing, but if you are just writing content or something and you want to have a quick idea of, like, gosh, does this page have any, like, really major issues on it? It's something you can use really quickly to check the page. The other thing is, this is not exactly web page, but I've actually run into this a lot more. If you use Microsoft Office to write documents or compose emails, or if you do anything with Microsoft Office, there is an accessibility checker right in Microsoft Office, in all of the apps, PowerPoint, Word, Outlook. Well, now that I say this, I assume Excel has one, but I don't know it. I've actually looked for that. But definitely PowerPoint, Word, and Outlook. And basically, it will check whatever it is you're working on. And if it finds things that can use some improvement, again, it won't catch every accessibility issue, but it will catch a lot of them. And what's nice is that it will walk you through how to fix it. So it's the type of thing that you can run. It's right in the ribbon. And you could run it, like, just before you send that email or just before you send that PowerPoint off or whatever, and it will help to identify issues that you could fix easily that might make a world of difference to whomever you're sending that to. And it will walk you through step by step how to actually fix the issues, so it doesn't, assume that you are like a PowerPoint wizard and understand exactly where everything is in PowerPoint. It will sort of walk you through it. So I use that myself because sometimes I will inadvertently create an accessibility issue. I don't realize it. I'm moving quickly. I'm trying to get this document written or whatever, and I do something and I don't think it's a problem. And then the accessibility checker will say, wait a minute, you didn't do this. Mm-hmm. And what's great is it'll help me do it, because sometimes it's some obscure thing in, one of the Office apps that I've never used it before. So I have no idea, how
cool. It sounds like that's really usable for the newbie.
Yeah, everyone I've shown that to loves it, because it's you don't have to install it, you don't have to do anything. It's right in the ribbon. It's super friendly. There. You just have to know that it's there, and you can. It's just it doesn't take a long time to run, because it doesn't find. The issues that it finds are issues that generally are pretty easy to fix. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that will add 2 hours of time required to finish your document. It's the type of thing that you run it and it will say, hey, you have this image and you didn't put any descriptive alt text with this image. And you think, gosh, I didn't realize I needed to, but yeah, I could write in a little description of this image, and it says, click here to do that. And then you type in, boy playing soccer, whatever the picture is, and it will just add the alt to that image. And now, you've solved an accessibility issue, and you've increased the experience for someone who may not be able to see that image. And it took you, probably seconds to write, boy playing soccer on a field, or whatever that description was. It's just, so it's great. And people that have used it love it, because it's right there. They don't have to do a lot of extra stuff, or download anything.
Yeah, those are some pretty cool resources. I'm curious, for the person who might be interested in jumping into the accessibility profession or field, or, I'd like to work in this field. This sounds interesting. What is it that they're looking for? I mean, is there a college major for this these days, or is there a way that they could get their foot in the door? How is that done? I know you did it in your own way, just by being real knowledgeable about computers and being a strong advocate. But how might a person, go about getting into the field?
Sure. There's a couple of great ways to do it. The education resources I mentioned are a great place to start. Especially DQU has a bunch of beginner courses, for lack of a term. I don't remember what they call that curriculum, but Accessibility 101 or something like that. Mm-hmm. The other place to go is there is an organization called IAAP, which has certifications that you can get. They have a couple of different certifications available. They have the CPACC, so these are initials you may come across if you're looking at accessibility jobs and stuff like that. The certified CPAC, Certified Practitioner in Accessibility Core Competencies, CPACC. And then they have the Web Accessibility Specialist, and if you get both of them, then you can become a CPWA, which is a Certified Professional in Web Accessibility, I think is what that stands for. Wow. The nice thing about that is, so these certifications, are, some employers are looking for them, but I think the true value in the certifications is that it forces you to learn, to open your mind to stuff you may not have thought about, and you have to get continuing education credits to maintain those certifications, and there's various activities you can do to do that. But you can't just get the certificates and the certifications and go home and don't do anything else from there. If you want to maintain them, you have to regularly learn, and that might be reading, or it might be attending a conference, or it might be whatever. It doesn't have to be an expensive thing. It's not like you have to pay for courses to keep learning, but you have to at least spend time keeping current. And I think that's really the value in the certifications. That said, they have a book of knowledge on their site that has lots of information for obtaining those certifications. DQU also has a course, a for-pay course for getting them, but the book of knowledge is free, and it's a great place to start, if only because it's going to give you a broad overview of a lot of stuff having to do with accessibility. I found it fascinating when I took the certification exams. I wasn't really sure what to expect, and I'd already been doing accessibility for quite a while, but there were aspects of accessibility that were very new to me, or that I was aware of but didn't really understand. The CPAC, for example, talks about legislation in other countries. And, while I may not need to know what the law in Japan is or what the EU requirements are, getting to learn a little bit about those things helps me to understand the attitudes that other countries are taking toward accessibility, and compare and contrast them with the attitude we take as a nation toward accessibility, or the motivating factors for the different models of disability. There are different models of disability, such as the social model, the medical model, there's a bunch of them. And understanding those models may not necessarily help me to design a better, more accessible website, but it will help me to understand where people might be coming from, if they're coming from different geographic regions, or if they've received disability-related services in a certain way. It might explain the type of services that they've received or not received, depending on the model that they're in. Often that will translate to the attitude that they may have toward disability, and understanding that certain countries sort of use different models for disability helps to also, if you're working with developers in other countries or offshore developers, understanding that difference is something that might be. Get them to quiet down. Might be very beneficial, right? Because they may be coming with a very different perspective.
That actually sounds very, very cool. Or, it's a different, multi-dimensional feature to it.
Yeah, I was fascinated. I wasn't sure what to expect, and I found myself really drawn into a lot of aspects that, again, I knew about to some degree, but not a lot, and it was really interesting. There's parts of that which talk about the demographics of disabilities and the prevalence of disabilities in different countries, and the reasons for that, right? Sometimes in some countries, incidence may be high due to malnutrition or other reasons. And, given that, what impact does that have socioeconomically for people that have those disabilities? And just fascinating insight into, this that can really shape our own insights and be like, I never really thought about that.
Yeah, I think that we probably all approach it, I guess there's a cultural thing, but, we all approach it from a more personal level, and kind of bringing in some of those other areas kind of gives you a different perspective, or a broader perspective, on how other people are impacted, and how, I don't know, how you can contribute a little bit more to their experience, or where the two have similarities, that sort of thing. Steve, what is the best contact info for you, something that you're okay with me putting in Access World?
I would say either email steve@sawczyn.com or the steves.life.
Steves.life, okay. And the last thing I wanted to ask you touched on this before, but I thought it was really impactful. You were talking about how you, and I'm assuming this was what got you to United Health, but you left, but you were talking about your own experience, I think, at some point, dealing with family health and trying to find information, or trying to navigate, the documentation or their websites or whatever, to get help for your daughter. And it sounded like you got to a point where I thought I heard you say, I don't want this to happen to somebody else, or I want to make a positive impact on this so it's better for the next person.
Yeah, I think, I actually started a blog post about this, and then I didn't publish it yet because I read it back and I thought, God, this is so depressing. And then I thought, maybe I ought to publish it anyway. And I may.
Well, it's very personal, and again, I'm assuming that, you would only give me information that you were comfortable with me, sharing, but I thought it was very impactful.
Yeah, no, it is. What I was going to publish is, a lot of times I hear comments like, oh, you should submit a feedback form. You should submit a bug request. You should send an email. You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And often what gets left out of the conversation, and this was so apparent during my daughter's medical stuff, was that I don't want to do any of that. I just want to live my life and move on with my day or do my thing. And so during my daughter's medical crisis, I was dealing with very inaccessible insurance-related information and needing to find ways to get that accessible. And that was time that I should have been spending with my child. Yep. And it made me angry that I had to spend so much time that I didn't really want to spend doing something that, needed to be done. And what is interesting is that was probably the most prevalent thing. But, I run into this. I started keeping a list of, how often do I encounter an accessibility thing? Sometimes it's major, sometimes it's not. It happens multiple times per day. And if I were to take the time to submit a bug request, a bug report or a feedback or send an email, contact the company every single time, I would get nothing done. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not easy to do that, or sometimes I'll take the time to do that and then I'll get some message back that's like, oh, thank you, we'll consider that for a future version. It's like a feature request. And so the part that I think sometimes gets forgotten is that, while I think most people want to raise awareness around accessibility, and certainly I do, at some point people want to also do whatever it is that they want to do, whatever is part of their life, either because it's exciting to them, like a hobby or something, or because it's something they have to do. I don't look forward to paying utility bills necessarily, but if I have to deal with inaccessibility of utility bill sites to pay my bills, I can't not pay them, right? And yet, every time I have to pay a bill, I don't want to have to engineer my own solution for paying the bill. Mm-hmm. I just want to pay it and move on with life and try to forget how much I just paid toward the bill, right? That's, no one is like, I want to take half of my day and figure out how to pay my, insert utility name bill, right? Nobody wants to do that. Right. And then you call the number and they say, well, we could take your payment over the phone, but we charge a $5 fee. And then you say, well, I don't want to pay the fee because their website's not accessible. So why should I have to pay the fee? And then they say, well, we have to check with the supervisor and we could waive the fee, but you have to call back to get the fee waived after it appears on your next invoice. I think, okay, I'll do it. And then I have to put a calendar thing so I don't forget next month to call to get my $5 back. I'll have to wait on hold for 20 minutes. I mean, at some point, you just want to pay the bill and move on. And this happens, I find, so frequently. And, when it happens on a retail site, oftentimes you can find a product on another site. If one site is inaccessible or causes you struggle, you can go somewhere else, and oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes you can find the same product somewhere else. But you can't do that with healthcare so much. If you have a health insurance company and you're not able to get what you need out of your health plan, or your medical provider, if you're not able to get the information that you need, you can't just be like, well, I'm just going to switch providers, because that may be determined by your employer, or if you're receiving state funded or assistance, then you may not have any say in who that provider is. And so you don't have that option anymore, and that's terrifying to me when it comes to healthcare, for self-care, or for if you're caring for someone else. And I've spoken with people who often don't even get preventative care because they're like, well, it's not accessible. It's too hard to set it up, so I'm just not going to do it. And I think that's a terrible reason to not do that. You might regret it later. If people are not going to get preventative care, I'd rather it be because they're stubborn or whatever. I mean, if they're gonna make that choice, it should be a choice that everyone can make. It shouldn't be, I'm not getting this because it's just too difficult for me due to accessibility to arrange that care, and then find out later, gosh, something very serious could have been prevented if only I had been able to book that mammogram or schedule that colonoscopy or whatever.
Right.
I couldn't. It was too inaccessible, and now I've got a much bigger problem to try to figure out how to deal with. So that's kind of what got me into the healthcare space, because it's really one of those situations where inaccessibility could mean the difference. Truly a life impacting difference.
Yeah. It must be gratifying to be a part of making a positive difference in that space for other people.
It is. I'm fortunate now that I work with a company that is local, meaning most of the patients and members are part of the community in which I live. So they're neighbors, they're friends, they're people that are here that, I've met in person that will give me a positive or negative comment. And they'll say sometimes things like, oh, I'm so glad this works. I was able to do whatever. I was able to get this information. Or, I'm so glad that this has been done because it's made my life easier in this way. And the reverse is also true. Sometimes someone will say something negative, but then I get to have a real situation versus a hypothetical, theoretical story to tell someone. I can say, hey, I spoke with this person who is really struggling to do a thing, and here's how they feel. Look at this angry email I got from this person, and read it, and oftentimes someone will come away and say, gosh, I'd be angry too if I was them. It's like, yeah, so now that we understand this, it's going to be much easier to figure out how to fix it because we understand where this angry person is coming from and why they're angry. Plus, they're in pain. They don't want to write to me for the same reasons I mentioned, right? Complaining is one more thing that's added to their day. They just want to get whatever it is and feel better. So I value the negative feedback as much as the positive because I realize that it might be a sacrifice for someone to submit that negative feedback. If you're in pain, taking the extra time to send an angry email to me is that's tough to do if you're in pain or not feeling well, or and so the fact that they take the time to do that is something I try to really honor and be respectful about, even if sometimes it's pretty mean.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, if most of this I'm just going to type up as an interview for print, but if the sound quality is decent on this, are you okay with me sharing some or all of it as an MP3 or that sort of thing, as an audio?
Yeah, I think that'd be fine. Sure.
Okay, cool. That's you've been really, really generous with your time. I so appreciate that, and it goes without saying that I always enjoy talking to you. So it's really easy to kind of get into it. But nonetheless, I do appreciate your time. I know you've got other things you could be doing, so thank you.
No, I appreciate it, absolutely. And, anytime, or if you think of other questions.
I may.
Gosh, I should ask some more,
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to follow up. I think this one's a little bit on a tight deadline, but God, you bring up there's so many topics here that we could take to the next level, and there's only so much time in the day for the time being, but I do appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, anytime.
I'd love to hear how things go with Gabby. I'm betting she's going to go for another couple of weeks if she gets an opportunity, but I'd love to hear it from Dad's perspective, like how it worked out.
Oh, yes. I'm just happy she's there, safe and sound.
Yeah.
And but no, she was so nervous, and now she seems much happier. And we've been getting various updates during the day, and
Cool.
I'm just thrilled because I was, this morning it was like, oh, I'm so nervous, I'm feeling sick, and I'm like, oh God, no, like,
yeah,
don't get sick.
Well, it's Daddy's little girl, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
So,
well, fingers crossed.
happy,
I think it's going to be awesome. I'm jealous of what she's doing just hearing about it. So.
Me too.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I know she wouldn't have wanted me to go with her, but I kind of wish I did.
Yeah,
it sounds
no
really
kidding.
awesome.
It'd be a blast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen. Thank you. Thanks so much, and have a great evening, Steve. And let's stay in touch. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Anytime.
I'll talk to you later now. Bye.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.